Started off here. Welcome to, what is it, our 10th or 11th meetup at this point? It's been quite a few now. And this one's on cross-platform mobile application development with Flutter and Firebase. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here who can introduce himself and tell you a little bit about what he's been doing and what he does.
I'm Jake, because I've been here for a little over a year. Been doing mobile dev since 2014, and I just learned about Flutter just a few months ago and decided to build a little sample app in it that I'll share with you guys later, which I fully endorse Flutter. It's really great. Yeah, that's about it.
What was your background before Flutter? What did you develop apps in?
Oh, I did iOS development. Started in Objective-C, and then went to Swift, and then did a little bit in Android, Java, and a little bit in .NET and C#, and then went on to Xamarin, and now on Flutter.
And then, hi, I'm Jared. I'm a senior consultant here at Nudesic. I've been here about 2.5 years now. I've been doing mobile since 2015 and then playing with cloud since 2016. My background in mobile is I started out doing Objective-C like Jake, and I moved into actually Xamarin first just because I had done a little bit of Swift but not really done much with it. And here at Nudesic, I've done a little bit of Swift. Don't have a whole lot of Java experience with Android, but I played with Kotlin a little bit just because my own preference when I started doing it. And yeah, I started doing Flutter as well a few months ago when it hit beta 2, I think it was. And we all just kind of started playing with it internally, like sending sample apps to each other to see what different people thought. And him and I were doing that with each other and like, oh, that's cool. How'd you do that? And incorporating that into our app and stealing ideas from each other and online resources we sent to each other. And I've done a few things on his app, but I will give him the credit. This is mostly his baby at this point. But so to kick us off here, before these cross-platform mobile, who here has done mobile? Besides, I know you have. Have either of you two done mobile?
Not getting one to production, but I've developed on both.
Okay, very cool. So then this shouldn't be completely news to any of you that originally and still today you can do this. You have your Java Kotlin for Android or your Objective-C or Swift for iOS. And as you build two apps, you have no shared code. Unless you have some sort of C library that you're sharing between the two, but at the end of the day, it's more, you usually have your iOS team and you have your Android team. And your iOS guys work on the iOS when you try to get feature parity between the two, but sometimes that's not always the case, and you have to manage two entire different code bases. So then some cross-platform solutions came around. Well, this is in no specific order as far as first last, because actually I think PhoneGap and Cordova were one of the first. And so Xamarin by Microsoft now, it compiles down to Java and iOS bitcode. So your Xamarin button is a iOS button or an Android button, and you can do the Forms app, which does cross-platform UI, or you could have your cross-platform business logic with separate UIs. You have your React Native from Facebook, which is you can still build your native iOS and Android apps, and it's JavaScript communicating with the native Objective-C and Java. And what's kind of cool about React Native is depending on how much of your app is just JavaScript, you can update your app without needing to do a release. But I believe there's a certain percentage of your app that is allowed to be updatable without a release. And at that point you have to, because usually you can just pull down new JavaScript binaries and do all that way. You have to do a release when you reach a certain threshold of your app. But for smaller things like, oh, I need to update this text, you can just update that, no problem. And then your Ionic PhoneGap Cordovas, which is just a web view running inside a mobile application. This was actually one of my first playing with mobiles was WebOS. For those of you that remember that by Palm, because you built a web app that then ran in the PhoneGap on other platforms. So you could build a cross-platform app, but really it was a WebOS app that you hacked to work on other platforms. So then what makes Flutter different than any of those other solutions? So with Flutter, you have an iOS and Android runner application. Now these apps can be Swift, Objective-C for iOS, or Java or Kotlin for Android, and all the root app does by default is execute the drawing library. So you create widgets, and it updates the canvas with that, and there's all the events. You have access to all of the native platform things. So you want to open the camera, you want to play music, you have access to all of that. and they have a built-in set of material design widgets or Cupertino widgets, which are for iOS users, it's your blue text for a button. It's instead of your Android boxed button as you would see in Material. So it's just they have that out of the box for you, ready to go. All you have to do is use it. And I'll get into how this runs on the device in a second here. But first, let's go into what Dart is. Has anyone here written Dart code besides the few of you that were here? Okay, so for those of you that haven't, Dart is a JavaScript language. It's ECMA approved. It's object-oriented, similar to, I guess, your TypeScript. But I always refer to it as Reacty, because you have the state you have to manage. There's a whole Redux you can use with it if you want to. It has the C-style syntax, and it's pretty straightforward, but it does take a little bit of, if you're not super into JavaScript and JavaScript frameworks like this, sometimes putting business logic in your UI code can kind of seem iffy, because I wasn't used to that. That was new to me, being able to kind of have conditional UI logic, like, hey, show this button on this platform and this button on this platform. I wasn't used to being able to do that. I was used to, no, you have to set the styles or the CSS differently for it, but you have the same button that you're using. I wasn't used to this. Oh no, you could have conditional show this when this case is true. And I was used to handling visibilities rather than handling what's actually returned in your state and stuff like that. And so deeper into how Flutter works. So you have your widgets, whether it's pre-created or one that you're created. It needs to get rendered. You have your different kind of things you can do with the platform, whether that's tapping, swiping, doing a custom animation. You'll see Jake has quite a few animations in his app that he did. He'll demo a few of those, and then your services that are interacting with your API. But at the root, what it's doing is it's using Skia and its engine to draw out on this canvas. So when you create a button, it's drawing out the button. So you're not getting your Android or iOS button. You're getting that drawn out with your styling, however you've designed it on the canvas that is the app. So I'm impressed with how well Flutter runs. Full disclosure, I went into Flutter expecting to completely hate it, because I've seen drawing libraries tried before, and they're usually slow, and they crash a lot, and they're buggy. And I was shocked when Flutter wasn't that case, because it was smooth, it was fluid. Now we've managed, it's still in beta, so we've managed to run into some issues with the framework itself. They've already managed to do breaking changes, which is, with a language this new, it's kind of expected. But it took a while for us to figure out why my version of Flutter, which was a week older than his version of Flutter, wasn't able to run the app, and what changes needed to be made to get it to run on the newer Flutter. And that was the switch from Dart 1 to Dart 2, specifically there. So then Firebase. Who here has used Firebase? So today we're going to be demonstrating the real-time database part and the authentication part of Firebase. We are using the website hosting with the app that we're using. We're using the flat storage for the icons in the app, I believe, as well as these slides that you'll have access to. So Firebase, for those of you that don't know, is it officially Google, or is it a offspring now of Google?
It's Google.
It's still
yeah, they bought it there. It's been integrated.
So it has a lot of different features. In fact, some of them are pretty cool, so I've kind of broken down a couple of them here to show you guys. But like flat storage is actually your Google Cloud buckets. So it's just you throw files in there. You can get either a Google Cloud link to them for a Google Cloud service communicating with that bucket, or you can actually get a URL link for downloading it. Your crash and analytics is what you would think. It's being able to send analytics for triggering an event, being able to show the crash and what caused it. Your notifications are sending push notifications. I'll get into that. And your website hosting is your basic flat website hosting. So real-time database. So it's Google Cloud hosted. It's NoSQL. It's synchronized in real time, and I mean real time. So it's real time as long as you are using an SDK that interacts with it directly. If you use the HTTP webhooks, you're obviously not going to get real time. And so a lot of the bindings I found, even for Xamarin in C# when we wanted to use it on a project, was just a wrapper for the webhooks. So it wasn't really real time. It wasn't going to do what we wanted it to do. So we ended up needing to create bindings to the iOS and Android SDKs. But you need to make sure you're using the proper SDK for it. So for instance, the one we're using today is the JavaScript one. It's officially supported by Flutter. It is actually the Flutter SDK for it. And it also offers offline sync. So it has all that logic in there for you so that you edit things offline, you reconnect, it'll update in the cloud. Functions. So Firebase functions are, to me, one of the coolest features that they have, and so they're very similar to your cloud functions. In fact, they're almost identical, with a few key changes. They can still be triggered by your HTTPS request, so you ping it, function responds, and does whatever you need it to do. But it's got other triggers that can trigger it as well. So you can have a real-time DB trigger. So say that you have for instance, the Hamilton app uses this. If you go into the Hamilton app and you enter their ticket lottery, you update that row in the database, and it keeps track of when that happens, and that's when it'll do a random pick and decide who gets a ticket to the next showing or who can buy tickets to the next showing. It does that based off of database triggers. You can have it do it off of authentication triggers. If someone logs in, you see that they logged in, you can trigger a push notification to them. You can trigger an email to them. You can do whatever you need to do because it's tied directly into Firebase. Any of the other Firebase actions like analytics, crashlytics, you can have functions trigger when it registers an event. So the app crashes, you can get it to send an email to your developers like, hey, crash reported. This is the information on this crash. It's zero maintenance. You can do your JavaScript or TypeScript. And much like other functions online, your logic is hidden. No one can see it. It's all in Firebase itself. So it's all just protected. Messaging. So this is fairly straightforward. This is just your push notifications. So anyone who's built a mobile app has probably had to incorporate push notifications. On Android, that was GCM, but now it's Firebase Messaging. On iOS, Apple has their own way of doing it. But with Firebase Messaging, it's all managed for you. You can trigger it through a function, through the console manually. And so you could have a database trigger triggering these messages, which is kind of a cool feature of Firebase, that, hey, this person's looking at this product in your analytics, wait half an hour, and then shoot them a push notification of, hey, you were looking at this item, like, try to get them to add it to their cart or do something like that, whatever the action that you would want them to do with that item. Or another example, this would be have it on the cart. So when they add an item to their cart, start the function. If they haven't checked out in 3 days, send them an email. Something like that. So no further ado, I'll turn this over to Jake and we'll kind of tag team this a little bit from here on out. But he's going to go ahead and actually walk you through the application that he built in Flutter. And some of and we'll talk about some of the things we've ran into with it, some of the places where we've been blocked a little bit. We'll explain to you how we did some of the custom animations that are created, such as scrolling up the page. He's created this cool like checkbox animation that just does a bunch of colors. And the app itself is a recipes app. The features of it include, hey, I'm going to go in, I'm going to make this recipe, and as I make it, I'm going to check off the boxes like I did that step, I did that step, I did that step. Favoriting a recipe, writing a review for it, giving it a certain number of stars, like this was a 4-star recipe, and then if you are signed in with your Google account, you can do all of that, and then you can view your favorites. So say you can favorite your recipes, and then from there, only choose the ones you've favorited. And he hasn't, I don't know if it's fully implemented yet, but you did have like the concept of this is a protected recipe built in. But you haven't worked on the in-app purchase side of it yet, right?
Just the UI look of it. Yeah, the in-app purchase is not yet.
Okay.
But just the possibilities ways to do it.
So let me go ahead and turn this over to you.
Sounds like a cool app.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to make.
You presenting live, Matt?
This is on YouTube now, but that's you right there.
Okay, so it's on the right. This is the app. It's just, I mean, it took me maybe about a week of development of doing this, and that basic app. Like I'm by no means an expert in Flutter, and just scratched the surface. But we've integrated like Google sign in, where I'm signed in right now. So obviously you're using Firebase, so you just select your account and you're in. And from there, we have your list of recipes, and this is just the Firebase list, or it's Firebase Animated list. So you're passing just a query, and it's automatically populating this. So you get a data snapshot back with the data, and you're passing it
And
to.
this is one of those, I talked about how there's built-in widgets or there's custom widgets you could do. A Firebase Animated List is a built-in widget. It comes out of the box with the Firebase packages and with the Flutter packages. And the cool thing about it is, since Firebase is real time, the rows in the list view, if something, we were having fun at the beginning of manually editing the database in the NoSQL and watching on the app as a new row would appear and everything would animate and the list would grow and it would slide in and stuff like that. And it's just a built-in widget out of the box.
Is that only with Firebase, or even if you're not using Firebase?
So
that
there
can
is
be
a
used?
list view, but you would have to manually control the animation with the
For insert and delete?
Yeah. For the animated list, if you just give it which node of the Firebase database it's listening to, and then from there it responds to changes.
So these are your higher level categories. You can go deeper into the categories and again get the actual recipes themselves. And again, this is just another Firebase Animated list with basic information, and this is that lock feature where tapping on that protein bowl too, because it's locked, I can't actually go into that. And then going into the recipe itself, you have all your data presented, your title, you have whether you can favorite it or not, this little heart. And favoriting that, I can go back over, I don't know if you remember, this didn't have any, it said no favorites yet, but now I have that as a favorite and I can go back into the recipe. And as your minutes over on the right, your calorie information, your servings, you have little dietary restrictions you can see.
Little value props there.
Yeah. If you had dietary restrictions, you can see what this is. And you can go down,
So there's Visor.
Is that the blue screen of death?
But we can switch to like the iOS simulator, but he was using his phone to do it, because that way you're using hardware to do it. There you go.
Alright, so you have your list of recipes, and then down your preparation instructions, your cooking instructions, and then a rating if you choose to give a rating. And this is one you can see more easily. Yeah, this. I don't know if you saw the little animation, it's kind of hard.
So
to see.
it looks a little bit slower on the device. It's not lagging at all. So through the AirPoint and everything, it's showing it. But and that's just how many lines of code is that animation?
That's less than 100. It's very easy to do. I can even show you exactly what it looks like.
Stop sharing, I think. I think you hit stop sharing. So Germany.
Alright, and this is. Yeah, it's.
So for the benefit of the older holders at the back, could you
Yeah, zoom in.
increase the font, please?
You mean you can't read that, Matt?
No.
I don't think the people on YouTube could read it.
It's really just a widget with an animated container. An animated container is just, that's a built-in container that they provide to you that does all the animation for you. You just provide it, it's called a tween. That gives a starting point and end point. Once you pass those values, it animates till it reaches those values. You can go back and forth. But just a container on top of a container with it rotated on top, and I have I guess 4 containers, one in a cross and one in an X, and that gets animated from like expanding and then contracting and then matches the background color, so you don't like see like fades into whatever the background color is. Look, and also just to demonstrate the real time of this, like that first recipe up there, so you don't see it as much, but I can change this to, and then updates that title right there.
So what architecture are you using to interact with Firebase? I mean, are you directly in your widgets?
Yeah, so the Firebase plugin itself lets you directly just do access to the nodes themselves. So that's accessing if you look at his database here, scroll a little bit, you can see that he has a list of recipes that are just have the basic keys for it. And from there, it just goes, all right, this is the first one, this is the second one. You can set which variables in that each thing maps out to, and then it handles it from there.
Okay.
My question maybe is a follow-on to Richard. There's no reactive JS or anything.
No, so we aren't.
It's all part of the widget.
So it does have like the whole state stuff. You can't. The state still controls when it updates and all that.
Yeah.
But a lot of that's abstracted away where you don't have to worry about setting the state of those kinds of things. And then as far as the app, no, we aren't doing Redux or anything like that. We kind of started out doing it just the built-in. This is what Flutter does. This is what Google recommends. And then from there, I've started playing with the Redux side of it. I don't know if you've looked into any of the other architectures yet, Jake. As far as even just doing state management, I've usually done, you have the one state that you pass through and use the same state to control things instead of having multiple states that inherit. And just because that, to me, that gets messier, I'd rather go the Redux route even. So it itself takes care of the state for the Firebase stuff, but everywhere else you do have to come up with your own state management like you would with React. So.
And where is it on the Redux side of things? Like on the JS side, there was a big change between 5 and 6. So where is this? Like
I'm not sure 100% what you're asking there because I'm not a Redux expert by any means.
Oh, okay.
Is that Redux 5 and 6 or RX?
RX 5 and 6, right?
So I'm not doing reactive JavaScript here. Reactive.
Okay.
I mean, there's basically branches, but not really true branches. It's more just different examples of how to do it. There is a React and RX side of Dart and Flutter. There's the
Google's not taking care of that, right?
Correct. No, it's not Google. We're doing this the vanilla Flutter Google way, but already the community has been like, oh well, I do this with this language, so we need to do this. Like I think someone was already working on like an Elmish version of it, like. So it was like, all right, it kind of already does that, so I'm not sure why, but okay. So it's everyone's kind of doing their own sort of thing with it, because I think that's in part because it's beta, and I don't think Google's necessarily given this is the way you need to go. They're more of a, well, let's see what you guys do first phase still, because I mean, it's still a beta product. It's not they say it's production ready, but it's still, Google's betas, I have to say, are much better than other companies' betas that I've played with, but it is still a beta product, so I don't even know if they know the direction they want to go yet.
There is an RX Dart, though, that you can use, RX Dart, and there's a Redux implementation in Dart. So if you go to the Dart packages, you can find Redux, RX, Dart.
Okay. But like between RxJS 5 and 6, there was a big change. Like it's completely incompatible.
Okay.
Sort of like I would say like
Swift 1 and Swift 2.
Yeah,
right?
so I just don't know.
Yeah, it's just.
I don't even know if Dart really
has
how long Dart's been around. So I don't even know. They might have just done it the RX6 way for all.
Okay.
I read that book, RX JS in Action. So I'm not sure, is that 5 or 6? Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
What day is it today? RxJS 7 will be out tomorrow.
Yeah, they keep changing things.
And it'll be all breaking changes again. Right?
That's why I stick to server side.
But for Firebase, it's out of the box. Everything, state management, the HTTP requests, they're
I
all.
want to show the animated list in the code so they can see what that looks like. Yeah. We'll just show you an example of like the ingredients or something, the Firebase animated list for it.
This is just the recipes list page, and literally it's just that.
So where is F defined for the query?
Oh, F, it's my reference to the right here, which this is a function I created. It's a Firebase reference, which going into this is just defining the table itself that you're actually reaching. And then,
so you create a query that queries Firebase, and then from there that'll return whichever node you're on, and then from there each step of the way you just go this node dot minutes. I want to set here this node dot this. I want to set there.
So it's kind of imperative programming.
You can do it both ways, like if you're your child, or you can do SB/1/ whatever, reach it that way as well. And very simple to use. And this last part of this is like the rating part. This is fun to do, of providing a rating. You tap on the star, and Jared built this little animation of it popping up and showing where you can write your review. And I think I already have one submitted, so it will just update it. I can do.
So see, for instance, right there, that's actually not built into Flutter yet. With a keyboard comes up, move up the input. That was one of the bugs I ran into. So one of the guys on the Flutter team created a temporary workaround, basically saying, hey, this UI element, tag it as always needs to be on the screen. And then when the keyboard event happens, check if that's not currently on the screen, scroll until it is. So there are some still kind of features you might expect out of it that aren't there yet. So that was one of them for me. So I was like, hey, if I tap on an input of some sort, scroll it with the keyboard, like just scroll the entire app. But then they're like, well, we need to figure out what rules we want to have, because they're still kind of determining. If you go to their GitHub and all the pull requests and everything and the issues tracked, a lot of them are commented with, well, we need to have a meeting internally and decide the direction we're going here, because they don't know yet. So that's kind of still a work in progress as far as the production ready and all of that is, if you deem that as still ready to go, if they're still openly discussing which direction to go with certain things.
So for iOS, would this also need the IQ keyboard manager, or no? This is independent.
You can just use they have a built-in method, right?
To do the same thing with that for the keyboard? Okay.
Yeah, we have one line of code that executes the same to do that. Because there's built into Flutter like a concept of observable widget to make sure that the widget is on the screen. So that's all we're doing there is saying, hey, make sure this widget is on the screen. And it handles it from there. We had to do a little bit of the animation as far as like the speed and the tween to an extent, but for the most part, a lot of it was managed. So you want to send your updated review?
Submit the review, and I can go into read reviews and scroll down. You can see right there, this kind of review with 4 stars.
Oh, it looks like you did it from your other Google account though this time, because it's also got a different color and everything.
I was testing the blue one, right? But that's the one I just did. And then if you do have a longer one, we added this read more, show less.
We haven't quite worked out the logic there for when to show that and when to hide it, because that's kind of complicated based on screen size, font size, and all of that. But it works for now. It'll just expand it and show the entire flexible versus, which is another built-in widget, the flexible, and versus limiting its height to being roughly the math of 2 lines.
Yeah, and then doing the animation up on the top is this, as you scroll, how it moves over, that was much more simple than it would be in something like Xamarin or another cross-platform environment.
I'll show them the code for that.
So I'm basically, as you scroll, I'm calculating the offsets of where you're scrolling, and then using that math to calculate the percentage of where that widget is on the screen and animating it from there.
And it's like, do you have a logic there for which direction you're scrolling, or what's the if else there? What's the offset stand for?
Oh, that's that was a more catch-all. If you scroll really fast, it might not actually send to my listener that you're scrolling. So if you scroll really fast, it would kind of get stuck because it wouldn't actually notify me that either it scrolled. So this was more like, if it's between 0 and 10, I know that you're at a point where I can default it to the baseline. Or if you're over that, then I can actually assume that I would get a notification where I can animate it as they scroll. And being like, if it's positive, I know they're scrolling down. If it's negative, I know they're scrolling up.
And so as far as the animations here, if you look at not sure if everyone can see it, but so you have, similar to some other languages that I've worked with, you have an animation controller, you have how much you're animating by, you can specify forward, back, you can do it on a loop, you can then tap into each of those events. So when it goes forward, do this, and then from those you could trigger it back and forth and have like a pulsating animation. Jump that thing right there.
What?
So in Is connection state a built-in thing, or did you have to do a package for that?
Actually, that's built in.
So built in right there, you can see that if it's waiting, you can do a loading symbol. If it was nothing, something went wrong, you can tap into. There are some platform specifics like that, like checking connectivity. This one is.
This is the feature builder. So basically, you're waiting for an asynchronous function to make a call to the server, and that while you're waiting, it's going to display this this loading text. And then if something went wrong, it would, like if it had connection state none, it would actually show that error message. And as soon as it returns, it replaces it with my actual value right here of the actual list of reviews. And it's doing it all. It manages that for you.
So what are some of the things you would say you ran into that were good to knows for beginners with Flutter from this app?
Okay, so yeah, like when you said of learning, putting logic in the UI. So that took me a little while to retrain my thinking.
Yeah, there is no concept of visibility or invisibility with widgets in Flutter. I don't know if that's a Dart thing. You might know more on that. If Dart itself doesn't have that concept, but so you have to then instead basically show nothing or show the widget you want in your UI. So you usually have a state variable that as that updates, it'll update the UI based off of whether it's a true or a false or whether it's some conditional logic on it. So this has this value, then do this or something like that.
So is it something similar to ngIf or?
Kind of, yes. You can do, yes.
Or are you saying there's no ngIf for visibility, just the component? Yeah.
Widgets themselves don't have a concept of visibility. So in your UI code, you can see, can you go to an example of it?
Of where we're doing
Go
logic.
to where my thing pops up in the recipe page.
Oh, where you're actually showing it.
Yeah. So I know I use it there.
This show review.
Yeah, so go down to where I'm using show review. Yeah, there it is. It's in there. No, that's not even it. But so I have this show review state bound variable that when it's true, the UI logic will say return new this container, else return nothing. Say, hey, I'm not returning you any UI logic whatsoever. Yeah, it actually works with returning a null, which sometimes I don't like using. I feel dirty when I use nulls sometimes. But so sometimes I just like return an empty container. Just say, hey, this is an empty container. You don't need to draw anything. There's nothing to draw here. But show this instead of showing the container with all of the stuff inside of it. So you do stuff like that to where it's conditionally showing your hiding UI. So it's similar to an ngIf, but it's actually in the view code. So yeah.
Here on your child right here, if you're showing review, if it's visible, you return this gesture detector, which has that send review page, and if not, then it would return.
Yeah, returning null right there. So it's show all this code if review should be visible, else show nothing. Which for a while I didn't like the whole concept of the. At the beginning, I actually don't hate it now. It's one of those things where it's just, I had to go into it with a different state of mind. I was not a JavaScript developer necessarily. I had done it, but I was very much I'd done a little bit of TypeScript, but mostly I did like C#, C, Objective-C, Swift. So it was, to me, a lot of this was new. So if you're not a hardcore JavaScript guy, some of that stuff might be kind of iffy to you, but I've actually grown to enjoy it myself. But all of these kind of builders and stuff, the thing you have to pass in is you pass in its context, and a lot of this app is all based off of its context. That's how it uses, like, determines what to show. That kind of, the context has the knowledge of like which OS it's on, so you can say, hey, from this context, tell me if it's Android. From this context, tell me if it's iOS, and show me the correct thing there. You can kind of play with context a little bit more there. And then as far as architecture of this app, one of the other things that I wish I would have started doing earlier because it would have made it easier is, and I don't know if you used it, so I might be accidentally putting you on blast, but go to where you create the app in the like main.dart. You do a decent job. All right, up there you do at least. So you can, inside of this theme data, he's doing at least colors up there, which is a step, but you can set a whole bunch of themes here, and then throughout your app, from that base widget, you can access all your theme data. So rather than needing to have like more of a style sheet concept, you can instead just have things declared up here in your theme data, and you can conditionally change that theme data as well. So it would be very easy to have like on the app load, check the SQLite database in your app, check what color scheme they've chosen for the app, and load the correct theme data automatically. Because you could just conditionally have that logic in your theme function, and then all of your code just uses widget.themedata.primary color, or widget.themedata.secondary color. And then from there, all of your app style just changes instantly. Like if he, up here is black, if he changed that and then reloaded the app, it would, you don't have to do it, but it would change all the colors all across the app like that, which is kind of a cool thing to be able to do simply versus needing to actually go modify different things. Or if you're doing it in web, you have to somehow switch which style or switch the colors for the styles. It's just, you can have different declared theme data and then conditionally return the correct one that you want. And then so, no, go ahead.
Oh.
No, go ahead.
Also, yeah, one of the other, like,
Oh,
getting
you're not
into
explaining that.
platform specifics.
Yeah.
Like for here, I'm like tapping the camera. Like this would show the camera both on iOS and Android, and I'm just basically calling the camera function for requesting this camera and taking the picture and saving it to some temporary directory. And that from then I can save this recipe and it would save it into Firebase itself.
So right now that image is just stored in memory, right?
Yeah, so it's stored memory and temporary directory right now, so I can do this, enter some random data. Add an ingredient.
It's my kind of recipe. Just put everything together. Is the steps for making it.
And from here, I can save it. And then as you can see at the very top, that now shows up.
And so for platform specifics in Flutter, it uses what's called a platform channel. And now there's two kinds of forms of it, I'll call it. One would be say, hey, I'm just accessing the current GPS location. I just want the current location or the current battery level of the device. That's all I want. Give me that once right now. And you just create a platform channel that goes over, executes your Swift or Objective-C or your Java or Kotlin code. And by the way, there's packages for all of this, but let's assume that whatever you're doing needed a custom something. So you send over to, you register this channel as battery channel, and then over in your platform specific code in your app delegate for iOS or in your main activity for Android, you'd go, hey, get battery is calling. Do I have a response for get battery? It'll go, yes, here's the response. Execute this code and return what your result is. It'll run, return the result, and then you'll get what you're expecting since you wrote the channel. And then there's streams, which the way streams work is you're opening up a stream to basically the platform specific. So then from there, your app delegate can stream over the camera, or it can stream the current GPS data. It can stream the accelerometer data as it changes. So instead of just the actual channel itself returning a result, you return a stream to that actively running Swift, Kotlin, whatever native language you're using, code that's executing.
How's the data marshalling between the different platforms? Have you guys looked at that?
Not closely.
Okay.
I've just done some basic ones. Like I did an app that purposely was anyone here for Matt's IoT demo that he did? It was like recording the accelerometer of the device. It was just different things and sending it to IoT Hub. I basically built roughly the same app in Flutter just without using packages, just to see, all right, I want to open a stream to this. I want to see how this works. I want to open I just want to get the battery level of the device. I want to get the device name. I want to get the device type. So I want to know this is a Pixel 2. I want to know this is an iPhone 5. I did just basic stuff like that just to see how the platform channels worked. And so I was comparing it to other cross-platform frameworks that I've at least worked with. So a little bit of React Native, but not a whole lot, and a lot of Xamarin. What I will say is, so the way, if no one has experience with Xamarin here, the way they do it is you write C# code even in your iOS and Android projects, and they have methods mapped over basically. So same methods named for everything, but it's you're writing the C# code instead of the Swift or Objective-C code. And what I kind of like about how Flutter does it, which while you have to instead set up this kind of platform channel and then have this future running that does the platform invoke method, get battery level, and you have to write all of this boilerplate kind of code in, or boilerplate code in your Flutter app. What I still like about it, I think at the end of the day, is on iOS and Android, you're able to use your Swift code or your Kotlin code. So say you have mobile developers that know how to do this, they don't have to try to map things over to another language. They can just go right in the language they're already familiar in. So say, oh, I know how to do that in Swift. And like, how many times, Jake, on projects here at Udesic, have you been like, oh, I can totally do that in Swift, and then have to sit down and figure out, wait, so what is that in Xamarin? So figuring out, because they're pretty good about method names, but there are certain things that they'll change, or certain things that they don't necessarily always have the same level of access to out of the box. It becomes, because it's C#, you start using reflection to access, and then it gets really messy really quickly. But so you can write your native code in that your developers are comfortable with, but that does turn into two different sets of code in two different languages that your developers have to at least be familiar with. The good news is, if you Google get battery level iOS, you're given a Swift example. You're not given a Xamarin iOS example. So all of your sample code online is going to be in the code that Flutter can use, which is a helpful kind of thing to run into.
Is there background audio support natively on Flutter? Because that's one of the areas that React Native have problem with, to support playing audio in the background. It's a big hassle over here.
So I don't know offhand, because I haven't tried playing audio in the background. I know that with
Could be.
Yeah, but I know with the method channels, you have access to a lot of that stuff. It's just, I would have to write it and see, because I just don't know. But I would imagine it would have some of the similar issues as React Native, because a lot of it it does seem to be very similar. But it would take playing with it to be able to answer that fully. Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it for the demo.
Right. So then, for the rest of the meetup here, let me take that. If anybody would like, and don't necessarily feel obligated, but this code will be on GitHub by Friday, I promise. But we wanted to create an attribution screen because some of our icons aren't owned by us. So we need to give credits to them before we release the code for it, sort of thing. So we'll have that uploaded to this by Friday. But if anyone here who has a computer wanted to try to build a sample app, we're using some Google samples this time, so we're not struggling with my edited day-of code. But if not, you guys can do those at home. This web link up here will stay live. It's actually a static site hosted in Firebase as part of our project. And I'm not going to take that down, at least for the near future. So you can go there, work through the code labs. If you come to another meetup and you ran into problems, I'll help you out. I know a couple of you are going to stay today and try building a Flutter app. We'll be around to help you build that as well. But it's going to be a pretty simple app. It's Google. It's a startup name generator. So it's going to be a list that infinitely scrolls and generates names as it goes, and nothing too crazy. But it demonstrates the using a list and tapping all that. And then there's a second example if you go to that URL that is all building. So there's your awesome Flutter, like I talked about, that you were talking about. And then there's actually a Flutter Firebase code lab as well. The reason why I didn't go this route is it has a lot more overhead. This entire first 45 minutes is pretty much just setting up Firebase. So then it doesn't become much of a Firebase Flutter code lab. It's more of a Firebase code lab. So at that URL, we have a actual just Firebase Flutter code lab that you build this, which is a pretty simple app, but it walks you through using packages, using state in Flutter, and even setting up Flutter if you don't have your environment set up. I know you do because we played with it last month. But yeah, so first, before we get to this, is there any questions or any more about the demo? We can do more examples here if anyone wants to see any more of the code. We can just go into Flutter itself and talk about it more. Any more questions from the group?
I have a quick announcement, just in case people are choosing to leave if they're not going to stay and do the workshop. Our next meetup is going to be on Google Assistant and writing actions that react to your voice and do something. One of the interesting things about this is that it's actually based on content that Google's providing for us. So they've got this big old challenge going on right now about people writing actions for a system that does interesting things. So we thought, for our next meetup, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through a bunch of content from Google on how to use these services correctly. And then we're going to have another follow-up the next day where we'll spend 3 or 4 hours actually trying to build out different actions. And there's a kind of an online competition that we can all be part of if we can come up with some good ideas. And
I'm down.
yeah, I know you are. You have to be. I'm writing your review soon. No, but I just want to get that out there. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff and doing something more interactive, please come along to that. I'm not quite sure of the date yet. It's not the last Tuesday of the month because I've got a conflict.
Yeah.
And nobody else can jump in at this point. So it'll probably be the week before, but it'll all be up on the meetup site if you're interested. Okay. Other than that, I want to say thank you, Jared. Thank you, Jake. Nice job. Well done. So yeah, there's still pizza, there's still drinks, and we're still. I'm staying for the workshop. So.
Okay.
Nice.
I missed. What are you doing now?
If you go to this URL here, this recipes, it's just something we hosted real quick.
Okay.
So the slides are available here from today. If you just want to review any of the things that we had in there. The sample app will be at this URL by Friday, I promise. And then right here, there's a part 1 and a part 2 of a workshop. Today, we have plenty of time to go through part 1. And if you finish part 1, you can feel free to play with part 2 a little bit. But it's recipes-39796.firebaseapp.com.
Post all the links also in the comments of this meetup. So
Yeah.
I'll be back on the meetup site as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so Jake and I will be around for the next hour or so to answer any questions that may arise. Right, I don't know how long you're doing it.
I had one comment, and maybe I misunderstood you. My understanding is that maybe it's with Dart too, that Flutter is actually compiled to native and does not transpile to JavaScript.
My understanding was that the Dart code goes down as just a drawing language. It's just executed by Skia in C++. So that you have your runner application that's just running your basically drawing app, which the Flutter side of it is what's drawn and the business logic for the drawing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not like it's from my understanding at least. It's not like your Xamarin or anything that compiles down to literally iOS or Android bitcode. That it's still well, I guess I'd have to look at how the package is built because it would depend on if the package is somehow being like AOT compiled, which it could be. But I know that like if you create a button in Flutter, it's not going to be a button in the native language. Because for instance, right here, Jake's app that he built, you saw on an Android phone running Google. If he ran that on the iOS simulator, you're going to see the exact same app with the same material design with no changes whatsoever, unless you coded in changes to look like iOS.
Okay.
So you get identical UI, unless you conditionally handle that or you do styles based off the platform.
Okay.
I missed that part.
Yeah.
I thought that when you say it's a button, it's going to be rendered with material theming on one and Cupertino theming on the other.
You have to specify like a Cupertino button on iOS and a material button on Android if you want to have. That's why. So when we've internally kind of just debated Flutter to an extent, one of my arguments has been if you really, really want a cross-platform that does one set of UI, you're still going to want to go the React Native or the Xamarin Forms route, because then your button is a button on each platform, instead of a Flutter, which is literally what you see is what you get on both platforms.
So at New DataSec, what have you guys decided? Are you guys going with Material or?
There hasn't really been a decision yet. I think it would really depend on a project by project basis. Like for instance, I know we did a project with Xamarin where the company wanted to go all material design. It ended up being a huge headache to try to style things on iOS to be material design because it's not meant to do that. But so something like this, if that was the client wanted to go all material design, something like this would be a good solution because you write one app, it looks the same on iOS and Android, and you're done. There's no extra special magic needed, no special styling based off of which platform you're on. So I still think right now for us internally, we're kind of still in the, well, it depends phase of Flutter versus a React Native or a Xamarin because we do both of those. We do more Xamarin. Andrew, you're an adult.
He made me laugh.
Yeah, so no, yeah, it's not, it doesn't do your iOS button on iOS or Android button on Android. That was one of the things that I, to an extent, liked, but at the same time, it's still, it ended up, we tried, just the two of us, like, over the course of a week, like, hey, let's create our own UI library that we we were calling it like New DataSec button. And a New DataSec button, we were trying to Cupertino button on iOS, and it just ended up, we would need like a month of just dedicated to doing this to actually get something usable out of it. And we ended up just going, well, no, you would just style which smaller elements you needed to look. It's just, I'm not sure myself how Apple would react to, for instance, if you just changed the buttons to be Cupertino buttons and the rest of it was still material design. I feel like Apple would reject that very quickly for design standards. But for having multiple design patterns in your application or something, but have you seen half material design, half not?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, it depends, right? I mean, there are things that you can classify as being material design.
Okay.
Like a ripple button, like the fab button on the bottom right. We use Cupertino mostly, but then we have that on some of our sheets, and that it's okay. I mean,
okay.
As long as you don't do like you don't have an iOS button and next to it material button where it makes no sense. Yeah. No. But if you do it in a different way, for recipes, add a little bit of garlic. Don't go overboard.
Alright, well then,
it's cool.
All right. Further ado, if anyone wants to start the part one of the workshop, feel free. Otherwise, we'll see you guys hopefully at the next meeting.